before we get to that, we're 7 months away from what is a big, historic change of direction for this country. What the British public said to our leaders in a referendum was, we've been going in this direction for over 40 years. Could you please turn around by 180 degrees and go in a different direction? And the main leaders all say, well, yes, of course, we respect the referendum result. But are they doing it with any energy, any vigour, any leadership? Are we actually inspired by our political leaders about this change that is happening? Let's listen to a couple of comments made today, and you can make your own mind up. Here's Jeremy Corbyn, who was interviewed today by Channel 4 News.
You want to be Prime Minister, making the big calls. Do you honestly believe that Britain is better off outside of the EU?
I want us to have a good relationship with the European Union. That's what we have to have in order to maintain jobs in manufacturing, supply chains and food processing. That has to be the priority.
The answer, is it?
So we have that effective trading relationship, including a customs union with the European Union.
I've been told I can only ask you one question, so I would very much like you to answer it. Do you honestly believe that Britain will be better off outside of the EU?
We are negotiating a future for Britain in relationship to the EU, which maintains that trading relationship.
Dear.
That's what we have to do. We have to defend jobs, and we have to have an alignment with the European Union on regulations to ensure that we have maintained food, environmental and employment standards.
But you would be the Prime Minister delivering Brexit. Do you in all honesty think that we would be better off outside of the EU than in it?
The Prime Minister delivering Brexit, if it's us, will be ensuring that Brexit does not damage living standards, but gives us opportunities to trade elsewhere also. That has to be the point.
You're talking about damage limitation. I want to know from you if you think we're going to be better off outside of the EU.
The answer I'm giving you is quite simply this. A referendum took place, a decision was reached, we have to respect the result of that referendum and negotiate a trading relationship with Europe to defend jobs and living standards in this country. That is the priority that Labour will adopt, and we would stop the Tories from having a no-deal Brexit and some kind of cliff edge which is destructive of our jobs and industries.
Why can't you say if we'd be better off outside? Surely as Prime Minister you'd want to do what was right for this country.
I want
make us more
Britain to be
prosperous.
as well off as possible in any circumstances, and we will negotiate an agreement with the European Union
Really
to do
painful,
just
isn't
that,
it?
but also ensure we have trading relationships with the rest of the world.
One last time, do you think we'll be better off?
I've answered your question 5 times.
Without saying if you think we're better off or
I've
not.
answered your question 5 times, and for the 6th time, I will say this to you. The Labour priority is to negotiate a trading relationship with the European Union to protect jobs and to defend the living standards that we have through regulation, but also to make sure that the jobs in the manufacturing industry and in the food supply chain are protected.
Thank you very much.
What can you say? 6 times he's asked a question, and 6 times he simply cannot answer it. And that's the guy that is the leader of Her Majesty's loyal opposition. I mean, if there was a snap general election, he could be the Prime Minister delivering Brexit. Now, maybe I've got this wrong. Maybe you found Jeremy Corbyn's words inspirational. What about Jeremy Hunt, our Foreign Secretary over in the USA at the moment? He was speaking about Brexit this morning.
But what I would say is that as a country, we have had bigger challenges than this in the past, and we will find a way, whatever the outcome, to survive and prosper.
Goodness me, it sounds like he's talking about the Blitz. I mean, he's saying terrible things could happen to us, but we'll survive and in the end prosper. Maybe I've got this wrong. Maybe you think that is inspirational leadership to take us towards this historic change at the end of March next year. And then, of course, there's the Prime Minister, Mrs. May, who was in this studio with Ian Dale in October last year. And when she was asked, how did she now feel about Brexit?
If there was a Brexit vote now, would you vote Brexit? Because you voted Remain in the referendum. Have you changed your mind?
Well, I don't answer hypothetical questions, but I voted Remain. I voted Remain for good reasons at the time, but circumstances move on, and I think the important thing now is that I think we should all be focused on delivering Brexit.
Absolutely.
And delivering the best deal. But you're asking me to say, how would I vote in a vote now against a different background, a different international background, different economic background,
so you can't
potentially.
tell me that you would vote
you can't tell me
now. Jeremy Hunt, when I interviewed him at the conference, he said he voted Remain in the referendum. He was the chief advocate of Remain. He said now he would vote for Brexit because he says George Osborne's economic predictions did not come true, and he said that he was fed up with the belligerent attitude of the European Commission. Now, if he says he could change his mind, I don't quite understand why you can't, seeing as you are Prime Minister leading us into Brexit.
Yes, and I'm Prime Minister ensuring that I'm going to deliver Brexit for the British people.
But you can't tell me that you would now vote leave in a referendum.
Because I think, Ian, when you come, I could sit here and I could say, I'd still vote Remain or I'd vote Leave, just to give you an answer to that question. I'm being open and honest with you. What I did last time round was I looked at everything and came to a judgment, and I'd do exactly the same this time round. But we're not having another referendum, and that's absolutely crucial.
Well, I just don't know what to say. I mean, the Leader of the Opposition refuses point blank to answer the question whether Brexit's the right thing for the country. Jeremy Hunt indicates that half the land could be destroyed but somehow we'll survive it. And the Prime Minister cannot give any enthusiasm for Brexit whatsoever. And these are three of our most prominent leaders and politicians in this country today. I think there is a total lack of leadership over Brexit. That has opened the door to George Soros and Tony Blair and others to try and cast doubt on the whole process. I think the country is crying out for leadership. Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me no, actually, what you've heard from those three in the course of the last few minutes inspires you, gives you confidence that we're going to do this properly. If that's how you feel, call 0345 6060 973, or maybe like me, you think the whole thing is pretty abject, text to 84850. And maybe you think, just it's the modern world, politicians are different now. We can't go back to people with conviction. If that's how you feel, tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC. And of course, those of you watching on Facebook can comment there too, as you do every evening. David is a new caller from Coventry. David, I listen to those clips. I'm just sort of sitting here with my head in my hands.
Yeah, I feel the same way, Nigel. First of all, can I just say thank you very much for getting yourself back into the public eye to help us out with all this, because we definitely need a few more people like you helping us out with all this.
Well, I'll do my best.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nigel. But listen, I feel the same. I'm very disappointed in the last 12 months. I'm very disappointed with Mrs. May. And I think history will show that she probably possibly was a true Remainer. Our negotiators, and David Davis, again, when the book comes out in a few years' time and shows the whole thing, will probably show that what we needed was somebody strong, and I think David Davis was strong, but having his held back. Sorry, Nigel, I'm trying to speak so quickly. I'm trying to get.
No, but there's no rush, David. There's no rush.
Now, these people seem to forget we are negotiating from a position of strength. There is a £90 billion surplus that we buy from the EU, not in goods, not in services, but in goods. There's a £90 billion services. So the people that are negotiating, Michel Barnier, Nigel, he doesn't care about the 500 million people in the EU.
No, he doesn't. I agree with that.
He cares about the possibly 100 people at the top of the tree over there. And actually, when I refer to the EU, I should from here on in refer to them as the lavish EU, the lavish pensions, the lavish lifestyle, the lavish buildings, the lavish travel. Everything to do with the EU is politicians living like kings. And I don't understand how people can't see this.
Well, David, I have to say, I went to meet Barnier back on the 8th of January this year. The one thing I was certain of is it didn't matter, even if lots of people lost jobs in the German car industry, as long as he could keep the UK tied to the EU's rulebook and stop us from becoming competitive, he would have achieved his goal. David, thank you. David saying David Davis, he kind of believed him, but virtually nobody else. And of course, Barnier today did a press conference with Dominic Raab, at which Barnier said, we are not budging. And Raab said, the negotiations are going really well. Let's go to Anthony in Staines. Anthony, good evening. Do you feel inspired by our leaders?
Oh yes, I do. I'm particularly inspired by the economic performance which we're seeing. And let's face it, look where we were exactly 10 years ago. We were facing an absolute economic, cliff edge. The country was teetering.
Yeah.
10 years on, we have a surplus for July. We've still got a long way to go. But that's quite a milestone, 2 billion surplus
it is.
For July.
It is. No, I agree with that, Anthony. And you could also add, of course, unemployment the lowest it's been since 1975, despite a much bigger population, and British exports last year 338 billion, a record year ever.
And yes, indeed, and without wishing to sound like a party political broadcast, I do feel that we have, in fact, quite an exciting new team. I hope they're not a flop. Hunt and Raab, which have brought some new blood in, and good riddance to Boris and to Davis, who I think just were running around in circles.
But Anthony, but Anthony, okay, I'm listening to what you're saying. But when Jeremy Hunt is asked about Brexit, he says, we've survived worse. We'll get through it, and in the end we'll prosper. It's not exactly inspiring leadership, is it?
Well, I don't think we need this at this stage. That's beyond, in the horizon beyond getting over this hump next March, which I don't think will be a hump. In fact, I don't think we'll even notice. I think we'll say, well, that's it, you know. There won't be any fireworks.
Like the Millennium Bug, or whatever it may be.
Well, exactly, because as long as that economy doesn't sort of go flat in, say, December, then I think that gives us a strong hand. And can I just comment about Corbyn?
Do.
Yes, well, I've always thought he was the weakest link, because you remember that press conference in the car factory, was it in March or something, when he was really, I think, playing to the Remain brigade in the Labour Party and going soft on Brexit, very soft.
Yeah. But, I mean, he just refused to answer the questions to them. It's absolutely pathetic. Anthony, I understand what you're saying. Things are improving. The economy's doing pretty well. All the fears we were given by George Osborne and others have been proved to be utterly groundless. Maybe you're right, Anthony. Maybe a soft approach is the right one. I just feel we need a little bit more genuine leadership. And then I think we'd shut down the Remoaners. We'd shut down the argument about second referendums or suspending Article 50, because the country, I think, wants to hear a positive message. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC, and it is now 7:15. We're discussing leadership. I think a complete lack of leadership over Brexit, as expressed particularly today by Jeremy Corbyn, who couldn't answer a question, backing up a Prime Minister and a Foreign Secretary who are pretty miserable on the subject. But before we do that, I'm going to go to Rayners Lane Station and speak to Mohammed, who was just outside the station immediately in the aftermath of this incident. Mohammed, good evening.
Hi Nigel, how are you doing?
Hi, yeah, thanks for coming on. So what did you see there?
So I literally came out of the station, I believe it was after the incident occurred. Large crowd, road was closed, and it didn't look like it was a normal incident. I asked what had happened there, and people were saying they had 3 or 4 shots.
3 or 4.
And people being arrested. So it was not your typical day.
No, and did you get any sense, Mohammed, if it was just one gunman?
We can't say. Not sure.
Not sure.
If it was one gunman, but people are saying 3 or 4 shots is what they heard.
Yeah, and I understand there were 2 people injured. We just don't know how seriously.
We don't know. No, I didn't actually see anyone injured. I think they may have already been taken away. But as I said, this is large crowds and the roads closed, and the police just examining the area.
What, Mohammed, tell us, what was the atmosphere? Were people scared? Were they sort of resigned? This happens in London now. What mood did you pick up?
So, I mean, personally, it was a sense of shock that something like this can happen. I mean, just yesterday there was another shooting in the Kingsby area. So people are shocked that this is happening in the streets of London and happening amongst young kids, apparently. It's just a sense of shock and disbelief amongst the locals.
Yeah, it's just awful, isn't it? Just awful.
It is, yeah. Not what you're going to see when you come out.
No, absolutely. Mohammed, thank you for giving us that eyewitness account. I've got somebody else who was there, Herbie in Harrow. Herbie, good evening.
Good evening there, Nigel. Well, this is going all on the back of my place. This is where the incident actually happened. There was 2 gunmen.
2 gunmen?
Arrested. There was 2 gunmen, they've both been arrested, they've both been carted off, one at a time. I've still got the police dogs sniffing around me, the dogs around here, photographers around here. They're still looking at the back of the place, because this is where they actually were. And it's bedlam here at the moment. You can't go down the streets, you can't get into your place, you've got to be escorted up to your flat or weren't allowed to go up there, because it was a crime scene. They had sniffer dogs, which they still have. And it's an incident that was about to happen because I have confrontations almost on a daily basis at the back of my place with drug dealing.
Drug dealing? So you're saying this is an habitual drug dealing area, yeah?
Oh, definitely. It goes on constantly. I mean, say the amount of people, because it's a back area of the shops, and people don't go down there. The other day I saw two men, exchanging drugs. I didn't say anything.
But Herbie, surely people won't be exchanging drugs at sort of peak rush hour.
You want to bet?
Really?
You want to bet?
Listen, I'm
sometime, Nigel, and see what goes on. They don't really care. They park their car up, block everybody in, and they do their dealings, sit in the car, and then they go off. It's a constant.
No. Listen, I stand corrected, and you're having to live with that on a daily basis. That's horrible. Did you hear the shots, Herbie?
No, unfortunately I didn't, but my next door neighbour heard 3 shots. I couldn't get through the traffic because this happened, the traffic was way back down in Imperial Drive and things like that. Rayners Lane's just blocked off completely. There's so many police, it's all cordoned off, there's police cars, there's still people looking, they're looking for something, so there must be something that's missing.
Are you shocked and surprised, Herbie, by this?
I've been waiting for it to happen, and it's come sooner than what I thought, actually, to be honest, Nigel. It's a big worry, it's a big fear. These people just don't care. They've got no scruples. They don't care who they shoot. It's a busy area. Rayners Lane's a busy station. If anybody got caught in shrapnel or flying or swayed bullet, anything could have happened. It just shows what's going on, and this is why I was speaking to the police. I said, unless we get more police, Nigel, we're going to have bigger problems. I'm sorry, but
Herbie, thank you ever so much for coming on and sharing that with us. Well, that was, look, we'll find out what this is all about, but Herbie making a point, as a resident whose property backs on to this station, he says drug dealing happens there on an habitual basis. That is, of course, just one person saying that, but I'll be very, very interested to see how this story develops and we find out what actually has gone on. I'm going to head up to Whitehaven in Cumbria and speak to Robin. What did you make of Jeremy Corbyn today, Robin?
I think Jeremy Corbyn was correct. The question he was asked, will we be better off outside of Europe after Brexit? And he answered the best he could because...
Well, I tell you what, Robin, how about yes or no?
Well, how can he say yes or no? Because we don't know what deal we will get. We don't know anything what the EU are going to do, basically. So I think how he answered was correct. What would you want him to do? Say yes?
Well, I tell you what I don't like.
Or no, we'll be better off.
He could have said, in terms of our democracy, for 33 years as a backbench Labour MP, I voted against every single European treaty, along with my colleague Tony Benn, because I believe that this nation-state should be democratic and not governed by bureaucrats, and in that sense, we'll be better off. He could have said that, Robin.
Well, you know something, Nigel? You've just answered my question. Sorry, you've just answered me for me. Jeremy Corbyn voted against the EU his entire life, as far as I'm aware.
Oh, yes.
But he didn't answer, will we be better off outside the EU, because he doesn't know. Nobody knows. None of the Conservatives know. But I can tell you something, Nigel. If Jeremy Corbyn was negotiating with the EU, he would get a far better deal than Theresa May because of his record, like you've just said, about the EU. Barnier would know that Corbyn doesn't want to be there and he's voted against it, so Barnier would be more inclined to realise that Corbyn ain't messing about like the Tories are.
That's a very interesting point. He'd know Corbyn's background on this issue. That's a very... I've never heard that perspective argued quite in that way. It's a very, very interesting twist. Robin, thank you very much indeed for that call. Steve on Twitter says, Nigel, this has to be a spitting image sketch. And yeah, you're right. 6 times the question gets asked, it doesn't get answered. And it's Mr. Corbyn in the end getting infuriated with the Channel 4 News questioner. It's a great shame, Steve, in so many ways that spitting image is not around anymore, although I hate to think what they'd have done with me. Hey, let's go to Chris in Colchester. Chris, are you inspired by our political leaders? Do you believe they're taking us to this historic move in 7 months' time in the right manner?
Well, no, they inspire me to go and throw up in my toilet.
Right.
That's about it.
So what would you hope for, Chris, in our leaders?
Well, it's always been from the start. I wanted someone who actually believed in what we voted for, and that hasn't been the case. I feel we've been shafted. But just one quick question before I make my point. Peter Hitchens, who's always been an advocate for us to leave, and Yanis Varoufakis, who knows more than anyone about the EU really, they both said that we should adopt the Norway option, but Yanis has said that we could move from that, say, for 5 years, because it'd deal with the Irish problem, and then transition into, or at least decide what we're going to do.
Yes, I have to say, Chris, Yanis Varoufakis is a fascinating character, a very eloquent character, and he's held up by many on the left, many Remainers on the left, to be this great hero figure. Let me tell you, Chris, what Yanis Varoufakis put out on Twitter today. He said, "I fought Brexit and continue to believe it is supremely damaging for the majority of people in the UK and for Europe. But as a Democrat, I respect the verdict of the majority that disagreed with me, and I think that a second referendum is politically indefensible and logically incoherent." Now, that is a political figure giving you clarity, isn't it? We're not getting that from Mr. Corbyn, are we?
No, and also he's got integrity, Yanis. As much, even if you disagree with him, I always listen to him, and he's great to hear. And he knows what he's talking
He's fascinating,
about.
actually.
But with regards to Corbyn, as pathetic as he is on this issue, what worries me most is if the Labour Party and forces in the Labour Party do remove Jeremy Corbyn, and we end up with David Miliband or Chuka, they will openly change the policy completely, and it will be we want another referendum.
But do you know what, Chris? If the Labour Party is seen to have gone against the referendum result, if the Tory party has not exploded in civil war, then I think Labour could not win the election. Just look at the number of constituencies in South Wales, the Midlands and the north of England that voted decisively in favour of leave, with millions, something like 4 million Labour voters voting for Brexit.
Yeah, the trouble is, though, that people like Miliband and Chuck, they don't care. They work for the bankers and the bureaucrats, as far as I'm concerned. But what I think that we're not going to be allowed to leave, and I've always thought that. And what we need is some kind of, not a political revolution, but some mass demonstrations to show that we've got the power as the people, millions of people, rather than these people with money, that we can make a difference as well. So
very interesting, Chris.
Like that,
it's very interesting that you say that, because a Labour figure this morning suggested that if Brexit didn't happen, there could be civil disobedience. If I'd said that, I'd be accused of causing the next civil war. But we'll talk about that in a moment. Chris, thank you for your perspective. Chris there from Colchester, down and depressed. I think people like Chris need some leadership. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC, and it's now 7:30. And so Jeremy Corbyn can't answer whether we'd be better off or worse off with Brexit. The Prime Minister can't say she believes in Brexit, but she'll carry out the will of the people. And Jeremy Hunt says, we've been through worse in the past. The Blitz was awful, was the inference that I took from it. But we'll survive. And in the end, we'll prosper. Interestingly, Jeremy Hunt is over as Foreign Secretary in the USA today, meeting senior US officials, including Mike Pompeo. And he's been giving a speech about foreign policy with regard to Russia. A very interesting speech that I think shows you where Jeremy Hunt stands on the European Union as well. So what Hunt said, he's called on the European Union to stand shoulder to shoulder with Donald Trump's US administration and to consider further sanctions on Russia. Two very interesting takeouts from this. The first is Trump, who many in the West have painted out to be Putin's poodle, collusion in the campaign. It's Trump that's the tough guy on Russia. It's Trump that's putting on crippling sanctions. It's Trump, in the wake of the Salisbury poisoning, who expelled 60 diplomats. How many did the Germans expel? 3. Nothing, of course, to do with the fact they're totally reliant on buying Russian natural gas, I'm sure. So, first takeout, Trump is the tough guy on Russia. The rest of the West are catching up very slowly. Secondly, Mr. Hunt, you are Foreign Secretary. We are due to leave the European Union in 7 months' time. That means we become an independent country. And do you know what independent countries do? They have their own foreign policy. Why didn't you say, Mr. Hunt, we will stand strongly, shoulder to shoulder, with the United States in dealing with Putin's Russia, and we encourage the rest of the European Union to come with us? No. Not a bit of it, begging the European Union to do what he wants. And of course, I would have thought the response to this probably will be they will totally ignore him. After all, Juncker recently said, we mustn't go on with too much Russia bashing. Why? Again, it shows the lack of confidence. It shows the lack of leadership. Now, Liam Fox this morning was on LBC. Maybe he had some things to say that would cheer up Brexiteers.
Writing today, David Davis's former Chief of Staff, Stuart Jackson, says a U-turn on EU immigration after Brexit would effectively be political suicide. Do you think the target of 100,000 is the right one, Dr. Fox?
Well, the government has said that there needs to be controls over total migration, and I think that one of the things that was clear from the referendum was that the public do not want unlimited movement into the United Kingdom.
True.
And I think the public would also differentiate between people who come to the United Kingdom with a job, who will be contributing to the economy, and those who, under free movement, were able to come to the United Kingdom and use our public services without ever having contributed to them.
But that target, 100, I remind you of the question, 100,000 target, is that correct?
Well, that's the government's target. At the moment, we'll be reviewing what we do post-Brexit. Well, naturally, as a member of the Cabinet, I support the government's policy. Right. But I think that we do need to look in the future at how we match our employment opportunities with our migration policy. I think the big problem with free movement from Europe was that people were able to come to the United Kingdom without having a job, and they were able to use our public services like schools and hospitals and housing without ever having contributed, and I don't think the British public thought that was fair, and neither do I.
So there you go, there's Liam Fox, one of the Brexiteers, and even he's saying, well, of course, I know we fought 3 general elections promising you we'd reduce immigration to tens of thousands a year, and we've got Brexit, in which I myself talked about immigration controls, but, you know, it's pretty clear, isn't it? They're going to scrap the target. They are going to scrap the target that they fought 3 elections on, and he says, basically, there's no limit, provided people have got a job to come to, and if that was just coming and getting a work permit that was time conditional, that may be okay. But what he's really saying is they can come, they can stay, as we discussed last night. And once they're here, they can bring their families. And Mr. Fox, what if they're self-employed? Because at the moment, you can come into Britain from the European Union. You know, Romanians could come into Britain from the European Union even before full accession rights, saying they were self-employed. What are you going to do about that? I'll tell you what, folks, they're going to do nothing. So we don't even get proper leadership and inspiration from the Brexiteers. And I'm sure there are many listening to this who are Remainers who are being very cheered up by tonight's conversation, including Jason in Epsom, who says, of course, Corbyn can't answer this directly, as he knows the answer, as we all do. We'll be worse off unless we take ultimate control and have a people's vote. So Jason wants us to vote again. He wants us to reverse the referendum result. Well, Jason, I thought it was very interesting. The Sun on Sunday Delta poll showing that when people were asked the question, do you want to just leave on March 29th next year, deal or no deal, 48% said yes, and only 28% said no. So there is actually, Jason, and you can argue all you want for your people's vote. By the way, we had the people's vote, and to even attempt to frame a second referendum in terms of being it's not the people's vote, it's the George Soros vote, is how I would put it. But the fact is, Jason, there is actually a big majority of the country want us to leave. My view is they're just not getting leadership. The closest thing that I've seen to inspiring leadership was Boris Johnson's resignation speech. That it had to come from an exiting minister at odds with the Prime Minister says it all, says Michael. Michael, that speech did not go far enough. Had Boris actually said, look, I've got the vision, I'm the man to lead, I like Theresa May, but she's not fit to continue as Prime Minister. If he'd said that, we would now be coming towards the end of a Tory leadership contest, and we might actually know a bit more clearly where we stood, but he didn't do it. Let's go to Nick in Kings Lynn. Nick, good evening.
In Remain Monmouth, actually, Nigel.
Hello. Oh, you're okay. Sorry about that. So, Nick, tell me.
Right.
I think, as a Brexiteer, there's a total lack of leadership. What say you?
I don't think it's a question about leadership. I think this thing about who the leader is, whether we have a national coalition, whoever the leader is, I don't think it's a question of leadership. I think it's a case of ground economics. Quite frankly, I think Brexit is just going to collapse on its own economic merits. And that's for you quoting all those economic statistics about the highest...
Lowest unemployment since 1975, record exports last year.
That's got nothing to do with actual Brexit, not that it has happened yet. Remember, it hasn't happened.
But Nick, George Osborne told us that it would happen immediately. There would be a disaster that would befall the country. 500,000 unemployed. That's what we were told.
Oh, that's George Osborne. I'm not a Conservative, incidentally. I'm not really Labour. But as for this comparison between Corbyn and Corbyn's stance now and the likes of Boris Johnson and Theresa May, I think we have to make a distinction between his anti-Europeanism, which stemmed from the Bennite days, the Tony Benn's anti-European, with your kind of anti-Europeanism. Your kind is more populist.
Do you know something, Nick?
Economic driven.
Do you know something, Nick? Do you know something, Nick? He sadly died very young. But I spent quite a bit of time with Bob Crow. You know, we appeared on panels together. And what was really interesting is we found when we talked together about open door immigration, when we talked together about the effect Brexit, the effect the European Union was having on our country, we pretty much agreed, Nick, on the big points.
Well, yes, that's Bob Crow. I used to be in his union. I wasn't a great fan of his, actually, but obviously...
Well, he was a good union leader, though, wasn't he?
Well, within his own local area, yes, within his immediate...
the tube drivers thought so. Anyway, Nick, Tony Benn, all right, Tony Benn did not place a big emphasis on immigration, and you know something, nor did I until 2004, because it wasn't an issue. But actually, Nick, I shared platforms with Tony Benn as well, and on the question of us governing our own country, on the question of Benn, a self-declared patriot, on many of the big issues, we did actually agree.
Nigel, he wasn't a patriot. He fought in the Second World War as a pilot.
Well, he
wasn't a patriot.
Well, he told me he was. All right, Nick? He told me face to face over a cup of tea that he was in a room after the smoking ban where he lit his pipe. Nick, you think it's all going to fall apart under its own weight. I respect your view. I don't agree. I think there's a great economic future for us, but we need leadership. What does Michael from Haddington make of it all? Good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. It's nice to speak to you on the matter. I caught you earlier on discussing Theresa May's strength or otherwise in the whole development of this process. And I have to say that I am utterly disappointed with it. I don't think that she is focused herself on what needs to happen, and I think she is misleading the country immensely. I voted out, and I really want out. And I think I'm being taken down a road I don't want to go, and I'm sure I speak for millions of people in the United Kingdom when I say that. And I could mention many, many other things, but I wanted to make that point clear. I just don't know where she's going.
Do you think, Michael, is she just out of her depth, or is it the difficulty of leading a divided party?
No, I think it's a predetermined outcome that is being developed without the knowledge of the British people.
You're suggesting she's deceiving us, Michael?
Absolutely. Absolutely. She's deceiving the people who voted to leave the EU and not leave Europe. You know, I'm a great traveller to Europe. I've just made recent trips to Italy, and only a few days before the bridge collapsed, I was crossing that wretched bridge. But I have many, many European friends.
Yeah.
I have a family that are in education, and we've got great European ties, but not ties with this unelected bureaucrat.
That's awful. No, Michael, I think that's right. I mean, you know, there was a good car sticker doing the rounds a few years ago, love Europe, hate the EU, and that kind of summed up the way I felt about it. Michael, what would you like to hear from our leaders, be it...
The sad thing is that in Europe, when you sit down, their leaders, for whatever reason, I'm not telling them this. I had one of those wonderful Italian meals recently in Verrazzi in Italy, with 15 around the table.
Yep.
Young university students in the family asking why we are leaving, and nobody had told them. Nobody's giving them the correct information. Nobody's telling them that, you know, it's nothing to do with populism or whatever. I mean, I have a great circle of friends here in Scotland, and those that are leaving or wanted to leave have grown substantially. So I think even the vote in Scotland might change.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that is right, and I think also the SNP's on the wane a bit too. Michael, thank you. And Michael there thinks we're actually being openly deceived. Edward says there was a people's vote. They voted leave. I have to say, I do rather agree with that, but that's not quite what we're getting from the leader of the Labour Party or from senior Conservative politicians. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show exclusively on LBC, and it's now 7:46. Well, I've been suggesting all evening a lack of leadership is one of our key problems here. Our last caller before the break, Michael, suggests actually it's open, willful deception. Peter on Facebook says, in reference to Liam Fox, the EU said from the start, no trade deal without the free movement of people. Is that what Liam Fox meant when he was watering down his Brexit campaign rhetoric? It could be. I get here. The politicians have been so cowardly and pathetic, not just on Brexit. My respect for them is now so low, says Chris. They're leading us up the garden path, says Jeff. Jeremy Corbyn. What did you want him to do, Nigel? Lie? We won't be better off out. Some people are convinced this is all going to be truly awful. Evening, Nigel. The nation, in every single walk of life, is leaderless. In my 67 years, I have never known such cowardice on this scale across all political parties, says Peter in Kent. And Dan on Twitter says, definitely lack of leadership. We decided to make the biggest change in this country for nearly half a century with possibly the weakest political class. It's like turning the first manned mission of Mars over to a bunch of 3-year-olds. Right, Dan, they're clearly not inspired at all. I'm not inspired at all. I think with some proper leadership, I think the country might start to unite around the concept that in 7 months' time we are leaving. Instead, this vacuum that is coming from our leading politicians is allowing people to try and cast doubt on it. Lewis is calling from Thornton Heath. Lewis, good evening.
Hello, good evening. Thanks for taking my call. I'll come to the issue of political leadership in a minute, if I may. But I just wanted to take you on, Nigel, on I think it's 4 times now you've spoken against the need for a second referendum. You mentioned Yanis Varoufakis. You mentioned, I think you've said that this will stop the Ramonas from once calling for a second referendum. According to my information, you yourself said in June 2016, if it was a narrow win for...
I said some in the Conservative Party would not be reconciled to it, and they would continue to ask for it to have another vote, but it would be at least 25 years before we got another opportunity.
Right, well, thanks for clarifying the quote, but I think you can follow the momentum of that if it had been that way, you yourself would have thought, I'm sure you would have thought it, and a lot of people would have said, it's nearly there, it was so close, we would...
Lewis, had Remain won, Lewis, there would be no conversation about a second referendum whatsoever. It would have been pointless, because you'd never have got Parliament, you'd never have got our political class to vote for another referendum. It would not have happened for a couple of decades plus. It would have been literally a non-starter and a joke of a debate. But the problem we've got here, Lewis, is the political class don't accept the result of the referendum. Even our leaders can't show any enthusiasm for it whatsoever, whilst at the same time saying they respect the vote.
I think if you could see it from a Remainers point of view, I think you've said we've been laughing at the moment the way things go. Yeah, Corbyn was truly pathetic. I think everybody would agree with that. And for us, actually, I don't think anybody's drawing hard from it. What we crave is a strong leader, and we really don't have one, as you can see, and you probably take great consolation in that fact. Can I just call you on one point of order, though, as well? You did say.
I did ask you to call in to talk about lack of leadership, not necessarily my own political views, Lewis.
But just quickly, you said of the Ramonas. I don't think it's good for debate to be held in this way. I shouldn't say to talk about Brexiteers as the bigots and the xenophobes, because they're not.
They do, Lewis. They do.
There are some, yes, but there are many.
There's a legion of them
who genuinely want the best thing, and I just think it demeans the debate with all this label name calling. It is a truly passionate era. I think it's going to be an absolute disaster for this country economically.
Do you think we're not good enough to govern ourselves, Lewis?
I think the issue is that if you go to Europe, surely I've just driven back from France today. The word is on no one's lips. Nobody cares. Nobody cares. It's.
Well, then it'll be easy then, won't it?
Well, it's easy for them. It's not going to be easy for us. That's the whole point.
Lewis, do you understand why people on my side of this argument believe so passionately that we should be an independent, self-governing nation-state?
We are an independent, self-governing state.
What, with nearly all of our laws made somewhere else? With the Foreign Secretary over there in Washington today begging the European Union to change their policy. Why don't we have our own foreign policy, Lewis?
The Foreign Secretary will be next over after we've Brexited, over to Washington begging to take the antibiotic-ridden chicken at any cost. Because we are not strong enough to stand on ourselves. Every nation needs to come together.
We're not strong enough to stand on ourselves. Lewis?
We're not, because...
No, Lewis, sorry, that's the end of the phone call. You think we're not strong enough to stand on our own. I do. And actually, in many ways, that, as much as anything else, is the emotional dividing line between those of us that want to leave and those that want to stay. Thank you for your call and good conversation. Brian in Surrey says, let's make general elections the best of three. Democracy is dying. Isn't it strange that all we ever hear in the news is the negative leaks regarding Brexit? Never a positive. Clearly a one-way view in the eyes of the government, says Nancy in Worthing. Nancy, it is a constant, endless diet of negativity. Nigel is missing the whole point. If Brexit was easy, then Theresa May would have a good footing. But it's unprecedented. Cameron left her to unravel this conundrum. Well, you know something? The more difficult it is, the more the need for genuine leadership and conviction there is. I'm not seeing it. Maybe Peter in Barking is going to tell me he's seeing great leadership from both Labour and the Conservative parties.
Nigel, good evening. Thank you for taking my call.
Good evening.
Nigel, not a bit of it. What I'm saying, the leadership is coming from Orwellian, left-wing Orwellian language, like the audacity that they can call themselves the people's vote.
I know.
And it's unchallenged. This is what we're letting them set the agenda. Now, what I've said to quite a few people, so what was that on the 23rd of June? Was that the imbeciles vote? I cannot understand how we're letting this get away. Now, to me, the challenge is by the mere fact that we're giving it substance by calling it the people's vote.
Well, I'm not. I mean, I'm doing my best to deride it, Peter, every chance I get. But that's kind of how they've styled it, and there are many who support that point of view that want it thought to be as such.
But surely, Nigel, that's some sort of, I mean, is it contrary to some sort of change?
Peter, I'm with you. It is Orwellian doublespeak. I absolutely agree. Newspeak. I agree with you completely, Peter, but that's what we've got. However, it would seem, despite all of this negativity, despite all that's going on, still the Brexit voters look pretty solid, don't they?
Without a shadow of a doubt. God bless them.
Absolutely. Thank you, Peter. My last caller tonight is Adrian in Lewisham. Adrian, I can't see any inspiring leadership at all. Tell me I'm wrong.
No, you're absolutely right, Nigel. And by the way, I agree with you on disagree with you on about 99% of things. But on this one, I agree with you. You know, Theresa May herself, if you may recall, said there is no Mayism. What that means is she has no idea where she wants the country to be. She just wants her name on the door. Johnson's about the same, and Corbyn, I think he'd be frightened. Yes,
careful.
I think he'd be frightened stiff if he actually did get his name on the door, because he wouldn't know what the heck to do with it. He'd just be driven by the momentum idiots behind him. He isn't a leader at all. He's just.
Do you know, Adrian?
Like a puppet. I think momentum have their hands somewhere in his anatomy to make him speak.
I was thinking, Adrian, earlier on before we came on air. You know, Tony Blair. I didn't agree by a long shot with many of the things that he did, but he would get up, say what he wanted to do, argue the case passionately, try to engage the public. Margaret Thatcher, exactly the same. She'd stand up and say things that were, you know, minority views, were not particularly popular. She'd argue them, she'd carry them through, she'd make the arguments all the way. You know, these were people who had conviction. What's gone wrong with our politicians, Adrian?
I agree with you, by the way. I've said precisely the same thing about those two people, whether you agree with them or not.
Yeah.
They were the big figures of the latter part of the 20th century. They knew where they were headed. And Blair, for all the fact that people hate him, Blair was responsible for the investing in education, the academy schools. Well, he was responsible for the minimum wage, which everybody...
Yeah, he was also responsible...
I take your point. He had a guiding philosophy.
Well, he did. I saw him face to face making some of these arguments. I didn't agree with him, but he had leadership qualities. This mob don't have them. Adrian, thank you. All of you, thank you. You've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. I'm back here tomorrow at 7. At 10 tonight, it's Ian Collins. But up next, it's Clive Bull.
Nigel, thank you.